book of James? Well, a major theme in the book is not just being a hearer, but a doer. It's the transition from belief to behavior. It's the transition from doctrine to deed. And of course, a key verse in the whole book of James is James chapter 1, verse 22, which says, "But prove yourselves to be doers of the word and not merely hearers who delude themselves." He's trying to get people away just from being born to actually growing. And by the way, your success in growing or not growing has no bearing on whether you've been born. There are people in this world that aren't growing correctly because of malnutrition, but that doesn't erase the fact that they've already been born. James is not dealing with birth issues. He's dealing with growth issues. He wants to transition people from being merely a hearer of the word to a doer of the word. And it's kind of interesting. You can take every major writer of scripture and just kind of sum up their writings in a word or so. I would say the major word that identifies Paul is faith. The major word that identifies Peter is hope. The major word that identifies John is love, the love apostle. The major word that identifies Jude is truth. And I think the major word that identifies James in his epistle is conduct. He indeed is the writer of conduct. How should the Christian live? How can the Christian achieve a practical righteousness pleasing to God that already mirrors their positional righteousness? What about some unique characteristics of the book? In other words, what are some things in the book that are kind of standouts that you don't have anywhere else really expressed in Scripture? And here are a few things. References to the Sermon on the Mount, a few of those. Tons of references to the Old Testament. Lots of illustrations from nature and daily living. So you kind of get the idea that James, the half-brother of Christ, was sort of agrarian, kind of a nature lover. So he uses different things from nature like steam or mist or a number of other things to draw spiritual lessons. The Christology of this book is somewhat low in the sense that Paul gives, like in the book of Colossians, a much more descriptive appeal to Christology. James really doesn't do this. James is extremely practical. It's one of the most practical books you could ever read. That's why a lot of people read it, because they want something that's more practical. James makes theological points, but it's not the highest theology that we have in the New Testament. It's probably the least theological book. There are numerous literary devices used in the book, figures of speech, rhetorical questions, things of that nature. The book is very concise. It's to the point. It's got a concise, pithy writing style. As I mentioned before, the quality of the Greek in the book is very high. That's why a lot of people think James, the half-brother of Christ, was too simple to have written something like this. I don't accept that position, but that's what a lot of people think. Some have called this book the Proverbs of the New Testament. If you were to read the book of Proverbs and the book of James, you'd have a lot of information there about pragmatic, practical living. Some have called this the Amos of the New Testament. Amos spoke a lot about social justice and social injustice. I don't even like using those words these days because Marxists, fill that phrase up with their own meaning. But social justice, God style, is simply going back to his law. Amos is all about that. There's a lot of social justice concepts within James about the rich not paying the wages for the poor and those kinds of issues. So James reads a lot like the book of Amos. Half of the verses, that's amazing. 108 verses, 54 of the 108 contain Greek imperatives or commands. That's why we're confident this was written to a believing audience. The book is unique because it's the oldest or earliest New Testament epistle that we have. You go into the Old Testament, the very first book written is Job, and the very first epistle or writing of the New Testament would be the book of James. And the book is unique because it's difficult to outline. It's much easier to outline Romans or Ephesians or Galatians than this book, but it's not the easiest book in the world to outline.